Good morning, good morning, good morning. Dan Kowalski. Dan, tell us who you are and why you're here today.
Hi. Who I am? Wow, that's a big question, Debs. Well, I guess the question is, I'm a new author, which has been a lot of work, but a lot of fun. And in my day job, I help people think better, which seems like an odd job to have, but there's a lot of need for it. I call myself a solution instigator because I don't really do the thinking. I just ask the questions to get people thinking in the way they ought to.
Oh, even if we just unpacked all of what you've just said, that would take us a couple of hours. So, so let's focus in on something, because otherwise I'm going to take us off down all different routes. So, one of the things that I'd like to talk to you about today is your book. Sorry, I have it. Do you have yours there? I like doing the book reveal. Dan.
I've given mine away, so I've just ordered some.
Fabulous. That's the best thing to do with your books. Get them in the hands of other people. Okay. So, Dan, you've just written this book called Wise Choices at Work. Go from doubting to decisive when the clock is ticking. Okay. Tell us about your book and how that fits in with you, the person, the solution instigator.
Yeah, so I actually start with the subtitle first, and I know that seems odd, but go from doubting to decisive when the clock is ticking. Today's world, we use the word business, but really, if you're a little child and you break that word down and enunciate it, it's busyness. And business has become busyness. People are just jam-packed with back-to-back meetings, and they tell me they have no time to think. And that's really a bad spot to be in, because then what you wind up with is bad thinking. So I've tried to make it quick and easy for people to be better thinkers and specifically better decision makers. And that leads to the title of the book, Wise Choices at Work. And as you could see from that title, WISE is an acronym, and it stands for Weighed, Informed, Sufficient, and Effective. Now, why that is that weighed means the downside. When we make decisions, we often are quite certain and even really excited about the upside of the option. Oh, it's going to do this, and it'll do this, and it'll do this. And no one's really thinking about the downside. And then later they say, oh, unintended consequences. And that's really not necessarily always going to be true. So W comes first and is the most important part of looking at decisions. Upside is easy. What's the downside? What can you do with it? How can you manage it? Can you prevent it? How can you recover? Then I is informed, because most decisions that we make, it's not just us, it's other people. We need to get their viewpoint of what this looks like, because that's where some of the downside can come from, where someone says, oh, we didn't think of that. We didn't think to ask them that. I started my career in the paper industry, and we had a mantra that we wouldn't buy a piece of equipment until the maintenance department would look at it, because it would look great for the operators, but it might be really difficult to do the repair work or hard to get the parts. Sufficient is, if you cover W and I of WISE, you're probably good, but make a Y decision doesn't really sound very good. So, but S and E for sufficient is the sort of minimum criteria for success. Did we cover that? Did we hit that? Because then you don't want to have people saying, you forgot that it wasn't compatible with X.
Yeah.
I mean, just a little bit about this call. I didn't have Chrome on my machine, and we can't do Riverside without having Chrome. So there's a sufficient thing. And that's no one's fault here. We just didn't know. And then effective is where you then can say, what's the upside? And how do you get the best out of it? And honestly, most people don't need to look at that so much. The reason I include it, though, is that a lot of important decisions will have intangible characteristics, and I do help people understand how to semi-quantify those. I worked with a group one time where they said that workers must be satisfied. And that's probably the hardest thing to measure. How do you measure satisfaction? It's not like there is a probe that they hook the people up to. Or think of it this way: when you're interviewing someone to join your team, how do you know they're going to work with your company, with your values, and how you do things? So that's a qualitative characteristic, but a very, very important one. So I talk a little bit about how to do that as well.
an awful lot going on there, and I want to stay there a bit, because I think even, and you mentioned it, I think if they only take away one thing from your book, they don't read all of the rest in there, and the 5 minutes and the 1 day and all of the other things that are in there, which I love. If they only take away one thing from it, if they understand that acronym, I think, and the first 2 parts of that acronym, I think people will make much wiser choices. So can we just kind of unpack, can you take us through like an example of a decision or a choice, and how that would consider through your acronym?
Yeah. So you asked if they take away one thing. I guess the thing that I would say is, to help understand why they would need to take away one thing, we have 2 modes of thinking. We have automatic thinking and we have deliberate thinking. And automatic thinking is what keeps us alive. And honestly, we don't have to think. We have all these great rules for for doing these things. And the best example I would give is when you're driving in your car and the brake lights go on in the car in front of you, the research shows you're hitting the brakes before you're even aware of that. That's automatic thinking. It keeps us alive. But in the world of business and in life, we don't have so many of those rules that get passed down. When I see brake lights, I hit my brakes. So the questions to ask, or what's the downside, is important, because that will disrupt your automatic thinking. Now, an example of a decision. I've categorized them in something I call the decision landscape, where 2 big components. One is the level of uncertainty of the performance of an option from low to high. So if we were selecting a supplier for office supplies, that would be an easy decision. We know how they would perform. We can go on the internet and find out their Yelp ratings or whatever that happens to be. Something that might have high uncertainty, I've already mentioned. Select a new team member for working in our group. The uncertainty is we're predicting how they're going to perform. Their CV, resume may not give us all the information. And so we'd have to ask better questions to ascertain how they'll perform. Then the second component of decisions is the impact of choosing wrong. If we choose the wrong vendor for supplying our office supplies, we'll just pick another one. I mean, that's really not a big deal. But the example I use in the book, if we're selecting a place to host a client dinner, that has a high impact if we choose wrong. The price point, and as I joke, inviting a vegan to a steakhouse probably wouldn't be a good answer. So that has high uncertainty high impact and lower uncertainty. And then the high example would be, what am I going to do with the next career move, or what product to launch if I have my own company. So with that sort of landscape, low is easy. High, we almost intuitively know that we're going to be we'll do a little more thinking about it. It's the mixed ones, low high and high low, where we get into some trouble, because we tend to default to that automatic thinking. And then we have either unintended consequences, we didn't consider enough people. So that's where I'm advising that people do a little more thinking as they do it.
Share that as a picture. There you go. Oops. There, maybe.
Yeah,
there,
it's not hard
to.
Yeah.
There. So the impact of choosing wrong versus the performance data uncertainty in high and low. And tell us about that decision danger zone there in that middle bit.
Yeah, so that's that mixed rating with low high and high low. When we see things like that landscape, our tendency is to turn it into a 2x2 matrix.
Yeah.
And the challenge with that is that the thin little lines, vertical and horizontal, are where you're making the most judgment, and it's not that clean. So what I want people to be aware of is, when in doubt, ask a few more questions versus defaulting into your automatic thinking mode, and especially automatic decision mode. And the only other thing I would say about decisions is they come in different flavors as well. And we tend to, a lot of people say, pros and cons. My sister will always say pros and cons all day long. And pros and cons only work when you have 2 options. And not all of our decisions are 2-option decisions. And you need to be aware that if it's more than two options, even if you're great at doing pros and cons all day long, it's not going to work there. And if you use an evaluation matrix, then you have to understand what are the limitations of using that, how do you set it up properly? Because as I mentioned, in many cases, the decision isn't hinging on the very measurable, quantifiable things. Cost, space, we have that stuff. It's the the French would say je ne sais quoi. It is the
Yeah.
subtleties and the nuances of these things. I'll give you an example from early in my career. We were interviewing a person. We were very, very big into teamwork, and we interviewed this person. And I can't make this up. We said, "What do you like about being on teams?" And he said, "I love being on teams." And we said, "Oh, that's great. What do you love the most?" And he said, "I love it when they give me a task and I go work by myself." Now that is
At
not
least he told
teamwork.
you.
Yeah, but at least he told, yes, and that was good. So if we had asked, so there's an example where if we had asked how many teams they had been on, that wouldn't have been the right answer because he
Yeah.
could have said, "I'm on loads of teams." And the reason he's on loads of teams is he keeps getting kicked off because he's not a team player. So you have to ask the good question of what do you like most about it? Um, more recently, I used to be involved with a team where we had to have people not rely on their old expertise, but to be able to ask good questions because they were going to become internal consultants. And so we developed a question that we found that worked really well, which is, what was the last thing you learned? And the important answer on that was we had a whole scale of what was a good answer, what was a great answer. The best answer was they learned something for the pure joy of learning something new rather than, oh, I had to learn the XYZ technique piece of software because we're now using that at work. Because that was very mercenary. So we actually had a candidate who she apologized before she even gave her answer. She goes, "Oh, this is going to sound silly." I said, "No, no, there are no silly answers." And she said, "I learned how to make fancy birthday cakes for my nieces and nephews by cutting circles in half and squares on diagonal and all of this, and I could make little characters." And that's the best answer ever because she just did it for the pure joy of learning. And those are the characteristics that are important on many of the big decisions that we make. Like, think about your career decisions. People say, "Do what you love." Well, yeah, you have to do something that I love eating chocolate, but you can only make a small living.
Me too.
Um, but you do have to understand and unpack that to what are the characteristics that are in that, and that becomes real important.
Okay,
So
wonderful.
that's decisions.
And okay, so and one of the things in your book that I really really like, because I am like a racer arounder, is the 5 minute decision. So I really like the idea that if I've only got 5 minutes, that you've given me something to do that makes me at least get me out of the automatic thinking, even if it's only for 5 minutes. Okay, so I really love that idea. So tell us about like your process. There's a 5 minute thinking. What else is there? The 5 minute.
Yeah, so the 5 minute question, I had to come up with something catchy, but honestly, the question probably takes 30 seconds. It's really in the what you hear in the first 5 minutes that's going to tell you whether the thinking is been relatively rigorous or whether it's really haphazard. So let's take the most important question. One of my beta reviewers said, I am now asking what's the downside so much in my life now that I never did before. Because so if you ask the question, what's the downside? The In the book, I provide sort of good, better, and best for what to look for in the answers, and I have a lot of 5 minute questions. And I also give what a bad answer is. And what's the downside? If someone says nothing, that's the worst because they have done no thinking, and you really want to.
Yeah.
There are no perfect decisions. Let me just. I should have said that at the front. All decisions come with some level of downside. It's our job to try to maximize the upside so that it outweighs any downside. Now, a good answer with what's the downside is someone says, well, it might not work in this environment. Oh, all right, tell me more about that. A better answer is it may not work in this environment, but we've done our testing and we don't, our environment is more like the one they said it should be used in. Oh, great. Uh, the best answer is it will work. It may not work in our environment, but that only happens 10% of the time. And what we're going to do is we're going to increase the airflow or change the temperature or bring in the expert to babysit it while we're doing that. So what they've done in that particular case is, on the best answer, is they said, here's what can go wrong. Here's why it's not that big of an impact. And here's what we'll do to prevent it. That's the best answer in decision making, and it's a good deliberate thinking approach. So I know that people are busy and they're not going to be able to remember everything. So I want to give people those 5-minute questions. So like, go back to that pros and cons. There's a technique, it's called the coin toss method, because that's a dilemma. That's an absolute dilemma. And if you say, all right, heads, I'm going to pick A, and tails, I'm going to pick B. And as you flip the coin, if you say, I hope it's heads, I hope it's heads, I hope it's heads, you actually know what choice you want to make. And then all you want to do is look at the downside. If you're not that fast a thinker, and as it comes up and it comes up tails, and you say, ooh, let's do 2 out of 3, again, you know that you wanted heads. And that can be a very, very good technique in certain binary decisions where they're both equal. But you're still going to be then looking for that downside. If you have multiple choices, the 5-minute question there, if no, we had A, B, C, and D. The best question to ask if someone says, I think we should go with A, how does it compare with B, C, and D? And if they look at their feet, look at the ceiling, then you know that they only really looked at A and they had a favorite alternative. And and it's okay to have a favorite alternative, but be able to explain why you picked it. And so the good answer there is, well, A outperforms B because it does this, 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 and this. It outperforms C because it does this, 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 and this. Then you know that they've actually done some assessment. Really, the 5-minute question is designed to test your thinking and their thinking, depending on who's involved in making that decision.
Fantastic. Okay, and the book is kind of like, sorry, here's the book. So the book "Wise Choices at Work" it explains how to use the 5-minute question. It explains others. It's also got some really gorgeous flowcharts in. I love flowcharts. So let's just talk about the book. So what made you write a book? Why a book, Dan? You knew I was going to ask you that question.
Yeah, well, no, I used to say to people all the time, you should write a book. Now I'm going to be very careful when I say that. I say you could write a book, but be careful what you wish for, or you might just get it. And your help really, really supported that. So, I joke a lot. I'm a solopreneur, and when I look in the mirror, I see the whole company, and my IT department is terrible, as we just saw with Chrome not being on my machine. And my marketing department needs a whole lot of help. And I can't fire these people because I wouldn't have a job. So I worked with a brand coach a few years back, and she helped me talk about what I do and how I do it, because it is quite abstract. And she said, I don't do marketing. I can introduce you to people. I can do that kind of stuff. So then I do a lot. I love to write, to think. I would write white papers, and this is not a humble brag. I can get words out. I understand writer's block for certain people. I never have writer's block. What I wrote may be useless, but I can get something onto paper or digital paper, however I choose to write. And I had written a couple of white papers, and a friend of ours, Stephen Walker, I sent him one of my white papers. He said, well, this is really interesting. Who's it for? I said, nobody. He goes, well, that's a waste of time. And this is the first time I thought of it. I will say that some of the people who read my stuff were like me. So I wrote for people who were like me. And thank goodness there aren't a whole lot of people like me, because the world would be really weird. So I needed to write for other people. And I'd never thought of it that way. And your process of writing for one reader made a big difference. And so Stephen introduced you and me just to have a conversation. And then because I was in your CRM, I took one of your webinars, Don't Write a Book Nobody Reads, and it made all the sense in the world. And I knew I had to spend for some marketing. And I thought, well, if I spend for marketing ideas with you, geez, I'll also have a book. Won't that be nice? And that's why I wrote the book, was more about the marketing piece. I'm still, my marketing department's still pretty crappy, but over the past year, I've learned a lot from you and your cohorts. And a big shout out to Susanna Simmons. I wouldn't have, my book wouldn't be what it is without working with her in the cohort with you. She's the one who came up with the decision danger zone as a terminology, and she encouraged me and gave me ideas of things. So I wrote the book to help my marketing department, and it's a little too early to say it has helped quantitatively, but qualitatively, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes, because I'm now thinking about who is the one reader? Who is that person? And your thought leadership canvases are also quite useful to explain and get myself organized. Because again, creating content's easy. Creating useful content, that's a lot harder. For people who are just like me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Were there any, so you mentioned Susanna's help. I mean, Susanna and you have been like superstars helping each other through the whole writing process. Were there any particular things that so you said you didn't find writing difficult, you never get that writer's block, but was there anything in particular you did find challenging?
The book launching. So if anybody's looking at LinkedIn now, I've been consistently posting. I never posted. I've been on LinkedIn since the early days almost. And I try to do something that's useful. And there are people who comment, and I actually got an email from one person who said, "I look forward to your posts. I'm learning a lot."
Yeah,
That's fantastic, right? And I never did that. I hesitate to say that I'm an introvert, but I'm not. I'm not a person who's like, "Oh, look at me! I wrote a book. I did this," and yet you have to do some of that. So that's been difficult to do. But again, your guidance helps with that, because you talk about it's not marketing; it's adding value, and
yeah,
adding value. I can get behind that as an
yeah.
idea. Now, am I doing it? I guess I'll have to see. At least one person thinks I'm adding value. They're looking forward to what I write, and people have commented. So I guess I'm adding value because I'm starting a conversation or getting them to go, I hadn't thought of it that way. Actually, one of my former colleagues, when I worked for a boutique consulting firm, made a comment when I had posted an image of the 5 blind people who go up to the elephant, and his take on it was a little bit different than mine. And that was interesting to hear his take. And I think neither of our takes were wrong. It's just a different perspective. It almost underscores the idea. 5 blind people go up to an elephant. They're going to grab a different part.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful. So I'm getting better at the difficult bits. But you've got some superstars who are just rocking it on LinkedIn, and I don't know whether I'll ever get to that status, but I'm better than I was. My social selling index has improved, and what the heck, I'm there.
And I think as well, Dan, what you said there was really interesting, because I do talk about, let's just change the idea. It's not marketing. I'm not marketing. I'm not running around marketing at people. But if you're adding value, then it makes it so much easier to think about doing, and it makes it so much more fun. But the thing, what I want you to think about as well is one person commented, or one person has connected with you personally, but there's probably 100 people who've read that and had that same thought or a different thought, or been impacted by your insight. It's just that they just haven't spoken to you yet. I had a client that waited 17 years to start working with me. during that time, I've been adding value at marketing. And after 17 years, she started working with me. So it's that there's like, when you're adding value, I think, some people will tell you, hey, that was valuable. Other people are just sitting there in the background, listening and enjoying. So doing really, really well. Well done, Dan. Okay, so a couple more questions and then we'll finish up. This is one of my favourite questions. There is another favourite question that I didn't prep you for beforehand, which I might ask you anyway because I'm mean. But let me ask you this question first. What did you learn about yourself during the process of writing your book?
Well, I probably already alluded to it, which is that I can, quote unquote, be social, in the sense of social. Because I mean, if you looked at my history of posting prior to that, I think I maybe had done, I think 4 posts, and that was because I was partnering with another small consulting company, and they wanted me to co-author some articles. So I wasn't doing it because, again, it wasn't my jam. But if I'm in the adding value mode, I've been able to take ideas from the book and things that are on the periphery of that, and have some comments. And the reality is I'll probably always be able to add value because the research shows that we make anywhere, depending on how you define a decision, anywhere from several thousand to up to 35,000 decisions per day. And some of them are things like, what to wear, what to say next. Some of those decisions are so automatic. Please do not do paralysis by analysis and do an assessment of that. But other decisions do require some thinking, and so there are things to happen. So in the U.S., we have elections in early November, and I was able to use the fact that I had to make a choice of who I was voting for. It was a small election because it was an off-cycle one. And those are the decisions that do matter. So I can add some value there. So LinkedIn is the only social media I'm on, and it will remain that way. It's where my people are, and it's the only thing that interests me because it's a bit more business oriented, a little more serious. But I can do it, and so that was a big learning. Like when back in it's been a year-long process to write the book. Back in March, and you're like, oh, you guys are gonna have to get on LinkedIn. I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I have to. Yeah, So people have said writing a book is actually quite easy, and especially with the Kindle platform, you could slap together a bunch of white papers, call it a compendium of ideas, and it's dead simple to publish it. I mean, you might have to pay someone to format it, but even that's getting easy. There's Atticus, there's all kinds of stuff out there that allow you to do that. But it'd be worse than what Stephen said to me about, well, who's it for? I mean, getting the book onto Amazon or even Ingram Spark, easy peasy. Getting people to use it and want to read it, and as you say, read and refer, that's a lot harder. And that's the discipline that I've learned to do that. I'm still at the early stages of it, but I think I'm doing better.
Yeah,
So
you're doing fantastically. And that's a really good point, actually, because lots of people, when they talk to them, they say, oh, how do I get published? How do I get published? And they kind of focus on that bit. And that bit really is quite easy now, especially if you choose yourself from a publishing point of view. That bit is easy. It is the writing the right book for the right person, getting it to them, getting them to read it, getting them to do what you want them to do so that they get that transformation. Then once they've got that transformation, then they go and tell the rest of the world how brilliant your book was. And then your book has this flywheel marketing. So and how great you are because you wrote the book. So you're absolutely right. I think the publishing bit, God, that's easy peasy. You can pay somebody on Fiverr to do that for you. Okay. I'm not trying to get myself out of business or anything here. It's everything else that's important. That's the challenge.
I think actually, I mean, to be fair, it gets you into business because it is so easy to get something that is electronic or even, the print copy. You can do that easy. But to have it be useful, that's harder. And your discipline, your techniques really make the difference.
Thank you. Okay. So I've got 2 last questions for you and then we'll finish up.
All right.
Okay. So what are your plans now? So you've got your book. how's business going? What are your plans for using the book to grow your business?
Well, remember, I told you that my marketing department needs help, so we're still sorting through that. But two big things that I want to do with the book. One, I really do want people to make better decisions. So I'm trying to. I'm in the process of considering how to create it into an accessible piece of work. And turning it into a course is one idea. I've had a design thinker really challenge me on that. And he said, you know what? Um, I have a course and not many people take it. It's still work. And people are, you're the one who says people are busy. They're not saying, gosh, I need to learn to make better decisions. I better take a course. So he's actually trying to get me to think about like a chat GPT kind of thing that asks you a couple of key questions. So with that challenge gauntlet put out there, I'm thinking through how to do that. I have created lots of flowcharts because that's how you get to decision making is by a lot of rapid decision diamonds, and so I'm looking at how to help people with that piece. So that's the one thing that I'm looking at. I don't want people to have decision regret, which they have so much of these days. And I say to people, I don't mind working hard. I mind reworking hard. And I find people are doing a lot of rework that's unnecessary. So I'm trying to make the materials more approachable. Whether it's and if I do a course, it will be with micro learning, so 2 to 5 minute lessons. But even that's too
Fabulous.
long. Um,
Yeah.
uh, I mean, honestly, it is. So, I just saw a book with a headline that says "How to Get People's Attention in This 3-Second World." Um, I mean, let's go back to LinkedIn. If people are looking at LinkedIn, you must have an image and something that's odd, so people go, "Oh, maybe I want to read that."
Yeah.
That's how, and people are just scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. So that's I'm trying to break through that because we need people to be better decision makers, I think, and better
Yeah.
thinkers in general. So
Yeah.
that's step one. And the other thing that will happen, whether it might be, I hate to say it, but it's not. It'll be a companion book that'll just be a ton of flowcharts that will help people get to the right spot really quickly. So in the book, I have a flowchart that in chapter 1 that helps people find where they should read in the book. And I've put 30-second summaries. So I've tried to make it as digestible as possible. Um, but it's still too much, maybe. So I
Here's an
want people to,
example.
yeah. Yeah. So, and we are born, we evolved to be just into decision diamond mode, fight or flight, fight or flight. There are other animals that have the freeze thing. We did not evolve with freeze. We have some of that these days, but fight or flight is really what we do. So decision diamonds, where it's yes, no, or A or B, A or B, that's how we think. We're good at that. And I'm taking advantage of that with some of the flowcharts I've created that are
Yeah.
more than what's in the book because JR would have had a nightmare trying to get the flowcharts into the book.
Well, there's an interesting topic that you brought up again there, isn't it? Because one of the things that I always talk about is that your book is more than just the paper it's written on. So as you created your book, you created your models, you developed your models that you already had, you made them stronger, you created assets with your flowcharts, you created assets with your 5-minute questions. So as you're creating this book, you're actually it's not just the book that you end up with; it's all of those other assets as well that you get. So it's I think you said earlier about you write to think. I write to create as well. So if I can make something from the crazy that's going on in my brain and turn it into something that other people can then use, then that makes me a very happy person. And that's what you've done with your book. You've turned a really complex and automatic or process into something visual that we can see, that we can pause long enough to have make a wiser choice.
Yeah. I would say one other thing. Prior to writing the book with you, I had written a lot, a lot. of thoughts on decision making, and I was going to sort of self-publish and just put it out there. It turns out that out of all that I wrote, maybe 5% of it made it into the book that I wrote with you, because it was crap. I mean, the British would say a dog's breakfast. That would be a compliment for it.
Or Dad would say pants.
Yeah, yeah. Again, the focus on the one reader, the focus on, what's it for? What do they need to use this for? What transformation do they need? That discipline, I guess that's another change. I'll still do a lot of writing to think, but if I believe that someone else should see it, I'll have to go back and do a thought leadership canvas to say, so what am I trying to get across here? Because I'm really good at providing way more information than anyone else might be curious about.
I think that's one of your superpowers, but that is beautiful, because the benefit of knowing somebody like you, Dan, is that you have done all of that deep thinking, and now you can surface the important bits that I need to understand now. And so that's one of the benefits for you in this 3-second world, which is you have done all the deep thinking, so you are bringing the most important points for us to consider. And that's basically what your book's done, isn't it? It's, you've brought the most important points to consider, and you've developed them in a way that make it easy for people to understand. Okay.
I didn't think decision making or thinking. It's been around for a long time. I'm just trying to help people access it.
I love that. Okay, I have one more question for you, which wasn't on the list, and it's your own fault that I'm going to ask you this question, because you made me think about it earlier when you were talking about the pure joy of the person when you asked the question. And my question is, when was the last time you did something for the first time?
Well, it's writing this book. I've never written a book before, and I would have never thought to write a book like I did with you. Because honestly, I was never thinking, I didn't even know about Kindle platform or anything like that. I was just going to make a big giant PDF, and here you go, have a PDF. And that might have worked, but I think this is way better. Yeah, absolutely way better. So that was a great learning. And I'm learning stuff on LinkedIn. Holy moly. Who knew?
You're doing fabulous on LinkedIn. Talking about LinkedIn, is that the best place for people to connect with you?
Yes, so Solution Instigator is me. Kowalski is the most common Polish name there is. It means Smith, so that doesn't help. Yeah, the Solution Instigator, you'll find me, and maybe you'll see some posts that give you some value on decision making.
I'm sure you will. And look out for the green book, The Wise Choices at Work. Go from doubting to decisive when the clock is ticking, from Kowalski. No. Dan, is there any final comment, anything that I haven't asked you, any final parting thought that you want people to have?
Yes, and that is, you have good thinking capability. You just don't use it often enough. Ask a question, disrupt your automatic, and you'll make a better choice. It will be wise.
Wonderful. God, that's a brilliant. You should have put that up in the book. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for being fun, for giving us a real quick tour through the whole decision-making process, for helping us to think about disrupting our automatic thinking. I know I need that disrupted fairly frequently. And for giving us some ideas and the decision danger zone and all of those things. And you can find them all in Dan's book, which I haven't told you enough about yet, have I? Wise Choices at Work. Thank you so much. See you soon, Dan. Ciao.
Yep. Bye.